And welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
I'm fine, Keith. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm good. Why don't you introduce our guest that we've got this morning?
I'll be glad to. We've got Bill Carey with us this morning. Bill is the founder and maintainer of the website Tennessee History for Kids. He makes the history something that the kids can appreciate and understand and enjoy. He also works with our teachers across the state, helping them to appreciate the history that we have. We're happy to have him, Bill, with us this morning. Bill, tell us a little bit more about your background, and we'll connect you to Oak Ridge as we go along, okay?
All right, I'd be glad to. I'm just sort of adjusting my lights as I go. Pay no attention to the movement over here. Uh, I I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, which is a place that Oak Ridge folks are quite familiar with because it's kind of the closest thing, very similar to Oak Ridge. Really, it's a place that's in the South, but not really part of the South's culture um, as much. My father worked for NASA, and I went to a really good public school, which, by the way, was named for astronaut Gus Grissom. And I went to a school where the academics was really hard and didn't realize it. That they sound familiar to people in Oak Ridge. And I
Yeah.
ended up going to Vanderbilt, and then I spent 5 years in the Navy flying airplanes. When I got out of the Navy, I went into journalism and moved to Nashville, which is really because of Vanderbilt. I guess I just liked living there. And I worked as a reporter for about 7 or 8 years, and until the internet came along and just totally disrupted journalism. And I realized that it was going to get, the world was changing. I worked for various publications. At one point, I was the editor of a newspaper in Knoxville called the Metro Pulse. Some of you may have heard of the Metro Pulse.
I do remember that,
Yeah,
yes.
that was about a year. It didn't last long but the Metro Pulse was changing as well. And then I started an internet newspaper called NashvillePost.com, one of the first subscription-only internet newspapers in the country, apparently. And but then about 2003 or four, I got into I just wanted to do something different. So I started into education. I started a nonprofit organization called Tennessee History for Kids. And the original idea was to do for like Tennessee history curriculum what Nashville Post, which was my internet newspaper, had done for journalism. And we just kind of started creating a website that would have content that teachers could use. And some of this goes back, you may remember we had a governor named Don Sundquist. And I
Yes.
remember when Don Sundquist made a big deal about spending a lot of money to put the schools on the internet. And I was a reporter at the time, and I said, well, what good does it do to put the schools on the internet? And he kind of looked at me like, what a smart alecky question. Isn't it obvious that once we get on the internet, that all of our problems will be solved? And the point I was trying to make is that there wasn't necessarily fourth grade level curriculum on the internet. Certainly wasn't at that time. And so I started doing that, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I still may not know what I was doing, but I've kind of had to make it up as I go along. Fortunately, I've had a number of allies that have helped me do this. I should point out that one of them is your state senator, Randy McNally, who's been an ally of mine
Right.
since I knew him and I was a reporter. But also, I have some sponsors, some of which I have long personal relationships with, such as Nissan and Blue Cross and HCA. But also, I just don't mind getting out there. I travel the state. I go to schools. I go to all the teacher conferences. I get on the internet and type in all the email addresses of all the teachers and send them email blasts. And next thing you know, the teachers are like, man, this is great. I use this in class all the time. And I probably work longer than I should, but I enjoy what I do. And
Mm.
but what this has mainly required me to do is learn everything I possibly can about history of Tennessee, not just Anderson County, but Jackson, Tennessee, and Memphis, Tennessee, and Johnson City, and Gatlinburg, and I didn't necessarily know a lot about Tennessee history except Nashville history when I started, and I've had. And the other thing is that there's a magazine, and I'll ask y'all this: do y'all get Tennessee Magazine in your part of the state?
I do, yes, I get it.
Okay, um, I started doing a column for Tennessee Magazine, and I'm trying to remember. This is a weird story how this got started. I was at someone's house, and they had a cop who lived in Clarksville, I'd never heard of Tennessee Magazine, and they had a copy of it on their table there. And I looked at it and I thought, this magazine ought to do a story about my little website. And so I called, and they did a nice little story about my website, but the entire story, they never gave out the domain name. They never said www.tnhistoryforkids.org, the entire story. And I called and I said, wonderful story. Thank you very much. But is there any way? And so I knew that I needed to offer them something in return. And so I suggested that I write little snippets that they could use, like a little paragraph here and a paragraph there of Tennessee history, and I could put the domain name in there. And that's exactly what I offered, was little snippets. And about a month later, someone called from Tennessee Magazine and said, we need your column. And I said, what column? And they said, the column you agreed to do. And I really had never even used that word. And the reason I'm certain I hadn't used that word is because I had just quit doing my column for the Tennessean. And so, well, anyway, I turned it in, and I have now done 192 of those columns. That's a column I've been doing for 16 years now. And
wow.
I don't know if Robin knows the story I just told you, but it's, just exactly what happened. But so I started doing that, and that has turned out to be another thing of its own, because that magazine has a subscription. It goes to like 500,000 households, or some huge number. It's the largest circulated publication in Tennessee by far. Nothing else comes even close. It blows away the Tennessean and the Commercial Appeal, or what's left of them. So anyway, and so along the way, I've written about quite a few things, including some topics from Anderson County, which seems to have a lot of, probably more history than most counties, certainly, at least in my opinion, as you know.
Well, there is a lot of history, especially in Oak Ridge. As you know, that's been my focus for a good number of years. And also Keith produced the Secret City documentary film, which is probably the best way to learn the history of Oak Ridge, is from that documentary. And by the way, I think I've told you this, but teachers are using that documentary film, and occasionally they will use a section of it that shows me in the video, and then we've got a connection. The next day they will give me a FaceTime call on my iPhone, and I will talk to the students and answer their questions directly. So being able to look at a video, write down questions they want to ask, and then have the Oak Ridge historian actually meet them online on the iPhone is a unique but very helpful and easy way to connect these kids. And I found that works well. But you're right, there is a lot of history in Oak Ridge. And of course, Oak Ridge is just a piece of it. Keith, just a minute. There's all kinds of other history associated with Anderson County that goes all the way back to the coal mine, Coal Creek Wars, and of course there's just lots of rich history all across the state. I'm sorry, Keith, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to say, of the 16 documentary films I've made in my career, 6 of them were about things that in Anderson County. So yeah, there's been quite a bit.
Well, and let me mention one other thing, and that is, in addition to all the other stuff I've had to do, the truth of the matter is about 95% of what I've had to do is just simply persistence. It has not always proven to be easy. You can't. I shouldn't imply that if you just throw something out there, teachers will use it, and if you throw something out there, they'll find out about it. I would have to guess that of all the traits that I've brought to this, whether it's writing or persistence is the number one thing. There are school systems in Tennessee where I've sent them letters, I've sent them free sample booklets, I've emailed them, I've called them, and nothing after years and years. And so finally, I will literally at times just show up. I'll show up in the lobby. I can't do that this year because of the coronavirus, but I'll show up in the lobby and say, I want to speak to the elementary school coordinator. And they'll say, well, you're not on her schedule. And I'll say, well, I'll just wait here then. And eventually they'll figure out what it is and they'll come out. And I've done this there are 3 or 4 examples of places where I've done this, and now they buy my booklets, and I need to explain what I mean by the booklets. About 7 or 8 years ago, I got an email from a teacher who was using our website because it was, and I'll show you the website in a second, but she suggested that I make the photographs on the website smaller. And I couldn't figure out why she would want me to do that. And it turns out that they were at their own expense printing my booklets and printing like 50 copies for the kids as a little Tennessee history textbook. And I thought to myself, well, that's not going to come out very well. And so we started doing little booklets. And by the way, can I take the screen sharing away, Ray?
Yes, you can. You should be able to just share the screen.
All right, let's see if I can do this here. All right.
We see your screen.
Okay, you see my screen. If you go to the Tennessee History for Kids website, this is not what it looks like. This is one of the back pages. It looks like this right now. It changes all the time. These top 3 boxes change all the time. But if you click on booklets right here, we started doing little booklets, and these booklets target specific grades. And we only have one for first grade. You may say, well, how do you determine what's in the first grade booklet? What's in the first grade booklet is based on what is in the social studies standards for that booklet. First grade is not the grade where they learn about the atomic bomb. Okay, Ray? I'm sure if Ray had a chance to write the social studies standards, we talk about Manhattan Project every year. But in fact, it's the year they learn about what is a rule, what is a law, what are maps, who is the governor. It's very basic social studies. And second grade is a little more advanced than first. And it's a book again about Tennessee culture. But when you get into like third, fourth, you'll notice like for 5th grade, we have 3 booklets. Why 3? Because there's a lot more in 5th grade. The kids are ready to absorb more. And 5th grade is one of the reasons I say they're supposed to do a full semester of Tennessee history in 5th grade. And one of these 5th grade booklets is the second half of history. And as a matter of fact, this is an Anderson, I didn't even think about this. This is an Anderson County photograph. There's our friend Bobby Kane walking into Clinton High School. And by the way, I got an email from Bobby yesterday. He's still alive and well. Well, he's, as well as we can all be this time. And, but these booklets sell for all of $2. They're 96 pages each. They're $2. That is less than it would cost for a teacher to go make a copy of them. Okay.
Right.
And we can't, you may say, why not just raise as much money, make them free? If you make them free, it's called junk mail. If you make something free, it becomes junk. We've learned this the hard way. And so we do all these booklets for 1st through 5th grade. Then we have an 8th grade booklet, which goes along with, and there's another presentation to be done on like what is in each grade. And, but in the 11th grade, assuming kids are on the normal curriculum, they do the second half of US/Tennessee history. This is our 11th grade booklet. And there is a chapter on the Manhattan Project. And Ray, you probably helped me write this thing. I probably ran this content by you. And but there's also
you did.
And as a matter of fact, here's Coal Creek again. So there's a chapter on Coal Creek, and there's a chapter on the Scopes trial, and there's a chapter on music in Tennessee, and I'm just kind of talking at random here, but I will tell you something. I'll ask the 2 of you, which audience do you think is easier for us to reach? The younger teachers who teach like 3rd and 4th or 5th grade, or the ones who teach 8th and 11th?
I would think the younger.
The 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Yeah, it is so much easier to reach a 4th grade teacher. There are about 5 reasons why. One is that, and I can't explain it except to say that they're typically younger, and they bring, and I hate to say this, and I'm sure somebody will be offended by this, but they bring a little more humility to the table. They're willing to try new things. Whereas a lot of times the 8th and the 11th grade teachers were like, well, I know my stuff. I don't need this. But also a couple other reasons. The older teachers have a tendency to be coaches, and we can't get them in the summer because they're coaching football. Yeah. And also the teachers who teach 8th and 11th grade, oftentimes they'll teach 180 students the same subject. Okay, whereas the 4th grade teacher has the same 25 kids all day, and they're just more open-minded. And so we hardly sell any of our 11th grade booklets, but our 3rd grade booklets, our best-selling booklets, are world geography booklets, which we do for third grade. We have sold more than 85,000 copies of this booklet. It's a world geography booklet for third grade. And we pretty much sell the same number of each of these two third grade booklets. There's another one called Across the Ocean, and there's one called Around the World, and there's the one called Across the Ocean. And these two booklets are not necessarily Tennessee history. So we don't just do Tennessee history. We do little US history, little basic social studies as well.
And very good. That's a broad curriculum. You cover the whole spectrum there.
I do. And while I'm on the subject, I want to show you a couple of things about this website, because there is an enormous amount of content here. Your folks may find this interesting. If you click on the word history, okay, you will find, among other things, people that are important in Tennessee history, like important Tennesseans that a fourth grader might do a report on. You will find virtual tours, and you and I did one on the Oak Ridge Museums not long ago. But I want to show you this one in particular. People love this one. There's a separate page for every county in Tennessee. And this is not meant to, I did not turn these over to the local historical societies. What I did is I studied the history of each county and came up with things that I thought would be interesting for like a fourth grader or fifth grader. And I didn't focus on just the Civil War, because this state is over obsessed with its Civil War history. Okay, if we're not careful, we forget about everything else. But forgetting Anderson County, y'all pick a county, and I'll click on it and tell you what we have about each county.
Oh, click on Murray County.
Murray, M-A-U-R-Y. Okay.
Yeah.
Murray County was the site. Well, as you probably know this because you know everything, Ray. But there happens to be a church in Murray County where more American Revolutionary War veterans are buried than any other cemetery in the state of Tennessee, like 16. And by the way, Sam Watkins, the Civil War author, is buried in this cemetery. It's in a ghost town called Zion. Murray County was also the site of a race riot that happened shortly after World War II, which was the first race riot in America after World War II. And it's also one of the homes of James K. Polk. And in fact, it turned out to be the last structure that stands in which he lived. Mm-hmm. And then there's also something called the Gordon House, which is really the beginning of the Natchez Trace. The Natchez Trace really began here. I live in Williamson County, where people think it began, but it actually really began down there on the Duck River. But let me give you an example of the kind of thing that we talk about. But here's Lewis County. Lewis County. Now, to me, from a point of view of a student, there are a couple of really interesting things about Lewis County. First of all, Lewis County has the elephant sanctuary. Now, this is more present time. I don't know if y'all knew this, but there's a place you ever wonder what happens to circus elephants or zoo elephants when they're really getting old? They go to Lewis County, to the elephant sanctuary. And by the way, these aren't elephants that you can visit, because these are kind of grumpy old elephants and they're dangerous. But also, Lewis County was site of the most famous hippie farm in America in the 1970s. And it's still, and some version of it is still there. It's called The Farm. And, but also it's where Meriwether Lewis died. And looks like my internet connection's gotten a bit slow here. And so it has bits and pieces. Marshall County is famous for the fainting goats of Marshall County. Marshall County is world famous for its fainting goats. True story.
Yeah. I grew up in Marshall County. I'm aware of those goats. And
yes.
Also back in Murray County at the Zion Cemetery there at the Presbyterian Church Cemetery, I did not know about the Revolutionary War veterans there, but my grandsons, 3 of them, went to the school, the Zion Christian school at that church. So I am familiar with that.
But one of the things that I'm happy to do is bring to light people and Ray, as a matter of fact, you're on the historical commission, right?
I am, yes.
I'll be addressing the historical commission. One of the things that has bothered me in recent years is Tennessee does not do very much for its war heroes or its military heroes since World War I. I mean, we kind we kind of just forget that there has been any war involvement since World War I. One of the people we completely forget about is this man. First man to ever captain a submarine that went to the North Pole is from Humphreys County, Tennessee. His name is Captain William Anderson. And what's particularly strange that we forget him is he was a congressman in the 1980s or 1970s, and he was on President Nixon's enemies list. But anyway, he passed away a few years ago. He's somebody that we learned about in the Navy.
Yeah. All right. Let's make a connection to Oak Ridge there.
Okay. Let's talk about Anderson. Let me talk about Anderson County real quick, and what we have on this website for Anderson County. We have the Coal Creek Wars, and I guess we all know Barry Thacker. Is that correct?
Yes. Very well. Barry's
wonderful. And then we talk about a little bit about Oak Ridge here. We talk more about it on a virtual tour. And then we, on every county history page on the right, we have a primary source. And some of these are easier to understand than others. And then we have a question about the primary source at the bottom. But the primary source that I chose to use for Anderson County, and Ray, this is one you helped me learn about, is the letter from the government to Parley Raby that says, the War Department intends to take possession of your farm on December 1st, 1942. And it's dated November 11th, 1942. Okay. Well, this tells you a little about how times have changed. Today, they give you a little more than 3 weeks to get your stuff out the door. But as it turns out, Ray, you and I discovered that there's a very interesting story behind this, and we'll talk about this later. But to me, when I'm a fifth grader and I'm looking at this letter, the obvious question that I asked, and it's pretty simple, is how many days did Parley Raby have to move out of her house and abandon property? And the answer, of course, is, 20 days. Right. After living there for generations.
Yeah.
Now, it says here, click here to learn the story behind this letter. If you click there, you will be taken to, okay. I guess it's a column.
No, you had it there. The Oak Ridge letters, what you were looking for.
Let's make sure all these links work. Okay, it is. Here it is. It's a column that I wrote for Tennessee Magazine about this letter. And Ray, you were the one that explained to me that this wasn't just some random letter, that this turned out to be a very interesting one because of Parley Raby's story. And Ray, you've probably told this story a few times, correct?
I have, for sure.
Yeah, but so, in fact, here it is. I quoted you here. So, but this is a column I did for Tennessee Magazine, and in fact, that's a picture you took, Ray.
Yeah, it is.
But this is fascinating stuff. I don't think second graders or third graders can understand this yet, but I absolutely think that once a kid gets into fifth grade, he could probably follow this, and this is interesting stuff. So
quickly, let me make that connection from the Nautilus to Oak Ridge. Of course, Captain Rickover then in 1946 came to Oak Ridge and realized that if he went to a reactor training school there and realized that if he used highly enriched uranium, he could build a nuclear reactor small enough to go in a submarine. And went back and actually began the nuclear navy, and the Nautilus was the first of those submarines. Alvin Weinberg, who was our favorite scientist in Oak Ridge, was actually invited to the launching of the Nautilus. And as a point of interest, on March the 1st, which is coming up in the next week or so, we're launching the archives of Alvin Weinberg's papers that are kept at the Children's Museum in Oak Ridge. They'll be placed online, and we've got an article coming out to announce that that week. So and part of what's in those archives are the communication to the letters between Admiral Rickover and Alvin Weinberg. They literally did become friends and communicated regularly over the years. So that material, a whole host of that material, is going to be available to the public. We've been working on it for the past 3 years, and it'll be out next week. So that's going to be week after next.
Rickover's second in command was Captain Anderson, according to the Wikipedia page I saw yesterday.
Mhm.
By the way, as you were talking, Ray, you said, I want to tell you something that crossed my mind when you were talking. You said, as of so-and-so, we are going to launch. I swear to you, I thought you were about to say our own nuclear submarine, because that's kind of the way it sounded. And I was sitting there thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if because on October 1st, we're going to launch. And then you pause, and I thought he's going to say a nuclear submarine.
So we have talked about bringing a submarine up the Clinch River and leaving it there at Oak Ridge. We actually had one that if we could have figured out how to get it up here, was going to be donated to us, but it was so expensive to get it brought to Oak Ridge that we wound up not getting it.
Yeah, you better do it during high tide.
Yeah, you're right.
I think we've been busy in Oak Ridge the last few years trying to get that plutonium PU 238 for the Mars rover that just landed on Mars this week. So.
Absolutely. You can't hardly find anything going on in the world that you can't make some connection to Oak Ridge if you try hard enough. And you're exactly right. What hit Mars just a few days ago is powered by the plutonium coming from Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
That's exactly right.
Now, let me show you a couple other things while I'm at it.
Sure.
I told you about the counties and the people. Virtual tours, if you click here, the idea behind all this is, even if kids could go on field trips and they really have a difficult time because of money, they couldn't go to all the ones they need to go to. And when I started this 15 years ago, a lot of these government-run sites had no website at all. And quite frankly, a lot of them were just a series of instructions. For example, Cumberland Gap National Park is a wonderful place, but I don't think the US government website is going to tell you it in a fourth grade level that you need to hear. And so we've created like little virtual tours and these are things that I've done. In fact, this thing here, I took this picture just a few months ago. So I'm constantly updating these things with new photographs. There is one here called Oak Ridge Museums. I have to figure out what to call it. And Ray, that you and I did this one a few months ago. We updated, as you know, it all had to be completely updated because everything had changed there. But it's basically a tour of about 5 different places in Oak Ridge and an explanation of what happened there. And this photograph here was taken at let me see, it's called the K-25 Center, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right?
History Center.
History Center. And then we also, at the American Museum of Science and Energy, the K-25 History Center, the Y-12 History Center, and the Oak Ridge History Museum. And there's Ray looking spiffy. But and we, I do everything I can to make it. And by the way, Ray, it's funny how you look into this stuff and you realize that for some reason I had not realized that a lot of the Clinton engineering works, which became Oak Ridge, was in Roane County.
Mm-hmm.
I always assumed it was in Anderson, and it was in Anderson, but it was at the kind
of the 3 sites, the Y-12 site is in Anderson County, but both the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the K-25 location are both in Roane County.
And I was able to bring some stuff. I'm really good at researching newspaper articles. This is one of the many that ran. This story did not run until August 7th, 1945. And it's one of this story would have run in every newspaper in the country. This is one of the first stories. This may have been the single first story that introduced the American readers to the idea that there was a place called Oak Ridge. It had been kept such secret during the war. People didn't know about it. 75,000 people already living and working there. So,
yep.
And then the other thing I was going to say is, if you click on in search of, these are sort of like virtual tours, but they're not necessarily these are not necessarily topics that are focused on one location. And for example, I have one called In Search of the New Madrid Earthquakes. There really isn't one place to go to learn about the New Madrid earthquakes. Even though, and by the way, there wasn't one, there were almost 2,000 of these earthquakes over about a 6-month time period. And here's one, for example. Every Tennessean needs to know this one. Did you know that the Titanic was the second deadliest maritime disaster in American history. The first was a boat called the Sultana, and it exploded on the Mississippi River north of Memphis on April 27th, 1865, and killed about 1,800 people. And a lot of people don't know this, and you may say, why have I never heard of this? Because something else happened the week of this exact week. You know what it was?
The Civil War battle, right?
That Lincoln was assassinated. And so
Lincoln.
Yeah. It was one of these things that people were so deadened, it doesn't make any of the history books. But if it had happened 20 years later, it would have. Who were all these people who were killed? They were almost all Union soldiers being returned from Confederate prisoner of war camps. So they were all starved to death. They were all, and most people couldn't swim back then. Okay, so once the boiler exploded, and what happened was this thing had been was supposed to carry at most like 450 people, and it had 2,500 people. And the reason it did is the government was paying the company that ran the ship based on the number of people that were returned. So they just took everybody, and they were going against the current on the Mississippi River. And but so you may say, well, what happened to this thing? Well, they're actually on the Arkansas side. There is a museum of the Sultana, which has photographs of many of the people who died. So, wow. But anyway, but one of the things that you'll find here is the thing about the letter, because to me, this is such an amazing story. It's worth bringing up. And I have a feeling that this is one of the documentaries that you made, isn't it?
It is. That's the documentary on the John Hendricks story. Yes.
John Hendricks. Yeah. And we all know who this is.
Of course, Ed Westcott. We wouldn't be able to tell our story if we didn't have Ed's wonderful photographs.
Yeah.
Ed passed away a couple of years ago. He was born in January, and January the 20th, I believe, of 2022, next year, will be 100th anniversary of his birth. And I'm trying to generate some interest to see what we can do to recognize in Oak Ridge the 100th anniversary of Ed's birth. One of the things I'd like to do is to identify the locations of some of those photographs, the famous photographs, and there's a young man that has contacted me and wants to do this, wants to put some markers in the ground for where Ed was standing when he made that photograph, and encourage, and put a picture of the photograph there so people can see, and encourage people to reproduce those original photographs in the modern setting. And in fact,
like a before and after.
Houses, so it'll work.
One other thing I'm going to mention about the website, I have never been one to sort of hide from controversy. That's probably one of my greatest strengths and one of my greatest weaknesses. About 3 or 4 years ago, I spent several months researching slavery in Tennessee. This was long before the controversies that kind of took over us last year. But I spent about 4 months at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, pulling every slavery-related advertisement that I could find and documenting them, and ended up, for example, pulling over 900 runaway slave ads. And but I ended up doing a book, which is another story. The book looks like this, about slavery, and in the book I talk about the different types of slavery-related advertising. Runaway slave ads is only one type, but slave apprehended ads, slave for sale ads, there were all these different types of ads. But there's things that became extremely obvious to me when I researched slavery in Tennessee that people just have way off. People are way wrong about it. But the degree to which, for example, slaves were leased out for use by companies really took me by surprise, because I've always heard that, slavery was, as the South industrialized, slavery might begin to fade on its own. Well, I don't think that's true, because the South was already industrializing in the 1840s and 1850s. And people who owned 40 slaves, 22 of them might have been farmed out to the cotton mill. And that's very obvious when you look at these. And also when the railroads came, a lot of slaves were working on the railroads. And when they built the state capitol, they ran ads. A lot of slaves were working on the state capitol. And but here's one: when steamboats came, a lot of slaves were working on steamboats. And this stuff isn't hard to dig up. It's in the newspapers. And so I did a whole thing on this, and I make it very clear on this website that this is not for second, fourth, fifth grade teachers, but I do think that eighth graders should be exposed to this stuff. And one of the reasons I'm telling you is a lot of people in East Tennessee will say, "Oh, slavery, that really wasn't an institution that was here," and that's absolutely not true. Slavery was just as entrenched in every part of the state. It might not have been as profitable in some parts of the state, but I can absolutely guarantee you that they were finding runaway slaves in Anderson County and running ads for them, and it was just entrenched in society there as it was here.
And of course, you know that Oak Ridge has that African burial ground there near the K-25 site. That's one of the largest slave cemeteries that you'll find anywhere. So yeah, it's there.
And then go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Just using as an example, Polk County, which is east, it's the furthest southeast county in Tennessee. It's 2 counties east of Chattanooga. They were selling slaves at the courthouse in Polk County in 1857. And he has the names of them here. Cynthia, a woman about 40, a boy about 21, a boy about 12. Obviously, these people are related to each other. I'm sure Robert and Elizabeth and Queen and Joseph are siblings, and they're being sold separately in Polk County. And yet, if you go to Polk County, doesn't have a lot of African Americans today. Okay, so a lot of people also forget that there were huge migrations after the war in some places in Tennessee that had huge numbers of African Americans immediately after the war, don't have any now. And the best example being Stewart County, which is west of Clarksville, which had huge numbers of slaves because of the iron industries, and now has almost none. And some of this stuff has to do with why. Okay, I don't really remember digging up a lot about Anderson County, but the whole Bobby Kane story about why it is that Clinton High School was one of the first to integrate has to do with the fact that Anderson County didn't have a historically Black high school. For that, like 75 of the counties in Tennessee had a Negro high school, and Anderson was not one of them. And but like in Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee, every single county had a Negro high school. Anderson didn't have one, even though Oak Ridge had a high school that was integrated a year earlier. Very complicated story. But anyway, some of this is connected.
It is connected. You're exactly right. In Clinton, they were busing over to Austin High School in Knoxville. Yes. And of course, in Oak Ridge, the Atomic Energy Commission, when they were the ones that encouraged that integration. And we had Waldo Kahn, who was a leader in making that happen. So yes, there's a rich history there, and we just identified and recognized what we're calling the Oak Ridge 85, which are the 85 African American students that came over in September of 1955 and integrated the high school and the Robertsville Junior High. And just this year, we brought that to light more than we, and I think that's been a good thing.
Why don't you, Bill, tell us a little bit about your trip you got planned this summer?
Oh, thank you.
Teachers to Oak Ridge.
Let me. No sooner than I get a screen sharing than I'm gonna take it back. We do a huge amount of teacher in-services. And it used to be we would just go to all the other in-services like the LEAD conference and the librarian conference and the social studies conference. And we started having our own. And a couple of years ago, we had like 8 of them. We had fall retreats here and winter retreats there. Well, last year, of course, we had to make everything we did become virtual, which was awful. We had planned all these summer events. So what we're planning next right now is it is February. We're all hoping that we can have in-person events again. And one of the events that we're having, in fact, the first of them, is going to be in Oak Ridge at the American Museum of Science and Energy on Monday, July 12th. And Ray, we're hoping you'll be there because you're on the calendar. And if you don't come, they're going to want to know why I put your name there. And
I'll be there, I promise.
now, the thing we don't know about any of these events, we don't know, like, will we be able to have unlimited attendance or will we be limited? We just don't know. I can tell you right now that if we could have unlimited attendance, we probably have 80 to 100 teachers at each of these events. By the way, we're staging 5 of them, and 2 of the 5 happen to be in Anderson County. We haven't ever done one in Anderson County, so it's time I made up for it. We're doing one 2 days later at the Museum of Appalachia. And all these will have themes. For obvious reasons, the one in Oak Ridge will have a theme of Tennessee during World War II, not just the Manhattan Project, but also important people from Tennessee during the war. For example, Ray, you know everything, so you're not a fair one, but a lot of people don't know who Frank Andrews is. Frank Andrews is, if you Google him, you will find that he is one of the main people considered to be a founder of the United States Air Force. He was killed during the war, and Andrews Air Force Base is named for Frank Andrews. And had he not been killed, he might have been head of the Normandy invasion. He is from Nashville, Tennessee. We ought to name the interstates after him. But like I said earlier, we don't do anything for heroes after Alvin York. It's like the last Tennessee war hero. Forrest and York, that's all we can handle here in Tennessee. But also prisoner of war camps in Tennessee. There is a place called there's a 4-H camp in Cumberland County, which during the war was a prisoner of war camp for German prisoners of war. And I happen to know someone, and I'm afraid there's no way he can come to this event because he's about 97 years old, who was a prisoner at that camp, who later became an American citizen. And he wrote a book about it. And his story is remarkable because of, quite frankly, how well they were treated. They were treated very well.
They were.
And until Americans started seeing the films of the Holocaust, and then they weren't treated as well after that.
Right.
But anyway, Glenda will give us a tour. We'll come up with the details as we get closer, because hopefully the world will change a lot between now and then, and there's a lot of things we'll be able to do then. This have an early Tennessee history theme. We'll have my friends Mark and Sherry Fincham, who will be there doing a presentation on Cherokee culture, and they will, I assume, be in Cherokee regalia. Our third one is going to be in downtown Chattanooga at the brand new Medal of Honor Heritage Center. And that's going to be, the first half of it will be there. And the second half, we're going to take the incline, go to the top, and get a tour looking down at the city from Chris Young, who's a tour guide. The fourth one will be at the Hermitage, and the fifth one will be at Discovery Park of America. And Ray, have either of you been to the Discovery Park of America?
No, I haven't.
I have not. Mm-mm.
This is it. Can you believe this? You drive to, this is in Northwest Tennessee. It's quite frankly, it's not even close. It's the most beautiful museum in the state. And I'm sorry to offend anyone in Oak Ridge or anyone in Nashville for that matter, but this is the most amazing museum in the state, and it's in Union City, Tennessee. You drive through basically cotton and soybean fields for 100 miles to get to it. So, but these are the 5 events we're doing, and hopefully things will go so well with the vaccinations between now and then that we'll be able to open this up. But right now we're intending to just take public school teachers, and we actually haven't even started taking reservations. We'll probably do that in about 3 weeks.
All right. Well, very good, Bill. Thank you so very much for this wealth of knowledge that you've provided to us. I mean, wow. I mean, I can't wait to get on your website and just spend hours and hours reading. For those of us who are interested in Tennessee history, that looks like an amazing place to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, really appreciate you being with us today. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, And I want to say something about Ray. We don't have, every city, every community doesn't have a Ray equivalent. And somewhere along the line, it has occurred to me that I could do a column on people that I wish would just get a medal. We don't have a medal for achievements in historical. There's one thing to be the county historian. It's another thing to spend a large part of your life creating something that people will benefit from for years. And Ray is one of the people that has done this. And Barry is, in fact, Barry Thacker is another person who's done this. Yes. But there's only a few people. I mean, and there's a guy named Jimmy Ogle who does walking tours in Memphis who falls into this category. But there's some counties, there's a lot of counties that don't have anyone like this. In fact, most don't. And Ray, you definitely deserve all that. And I'll also appreciate how much you've helped me, because there have been times when there's stuff on my website that's not quite right. And I appreciate the way you've explained to me, Bill, you've kind of got this a little off without being a smart aleck about it.
Well, you're doing such wonderful work. I don't want to discourage you at all. And I, like I said about Keith, he and I have worked together for a number of years now, and video, documentary films, that's a lasting legacy that he's created for us as well. But I do appreciate what you're saying, and thank you for mentioning. But none of us can compare to what you've done with this amazing website, but not just a website. I mean, there's booklets, you have a personal outreach to a lot of teachers. And as you are beginning to realize, I'm sure, you filled a niche that the education system was not providing for. And you've done it in a way that I think is outstanding. Should be a model for other states, and there ought to be other Bill Careys in other states too. So yep. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You're welcome.
All right. Ray, who do we have coming up next time?
Oh, we have Alex Wellerstein will be coming next time. And Alex has a website called, oh my goodness, it just slipped me.
What kind of a name is that for a website? Oh my goodness, it just slipped me.com.
I should have written that down.
That's okay. That's all right.
But anyway,
he's a historian.
Yeah, he is a historian, a professor in the Northeast. Okay. And that just aggravates me that I can't remember his website.
That's okay. He's a historian. He's a professor in the Northeast. He's got a website, and I'm sure he'll tell us all about it.
Ray, what's his name again?
Alex Wellerstein.
Okay, y'all talk amongst yourself, and I'll see what I can come up with. Nagasaki?
Oh no, is
he an expert?
Oh man,
Is he an expert on the bombing of Nagasaki?
He is an expert on the Manhattan Project for sure.
Okay, well, here's the thing: if somebody Googles that name, I think they'll find it in the first 6 things. So,
nuclearsecrecy.com. Nuclearsecrecy.com is what it looks like.
No wonder he could remember.
Yeah.
There's something in the chat when you say that makes you forget it. See, Ray just fell for it.
Restricted Data is his blog that he has. Okay. And the history of nuclear secrecy in the United States. So Restricted Data is the name of it. Bless my heart.
All right. Okay. Well, all right. Bill, Ray, thank you so much. And we'll be back, folks, in a couple more weeks with our new podcast. Thank you all.
Thank you.